Been working and trying to find a solution. Those repairs have continued to grow in need, and we are feeling the urgency of making repairs so that City Hall can provide the services that it provides to citizens. 2 different times in the last 5 months, I've had a call from the city manager saying, we have a problem at City Hall. In February, they called to tell me that the 3rd boiler out of our 4-boiler system had gone down, and we were now operating on 1 boiler. So that was obviously a game-changing piece of information, and we've worried about what the capacity of that boiler is to carry the building even through another winter. 2 weeks ago, I got a call and actually came with a picture on my phone that was quite disgusting of biomatter in the basement. And they had lifted a panel there for our information system. I don't know if it was the phone system or what it was, but you could see all the wires down in there flooded with this organic matter that had a not very pleasant odor to it. And it brings out the truth that the plumbing there is 55 years old. And it was about 18 months ago, we had a pipe burst on a Tuesday. We were scheduled to have a city council meeting there, and the pipe caused flooding there on the 3rd floor. It shut down the elevators, so citizens could not come to use the elevators to come to a city council meeting. We had to scramble, move the meeting over here, which meant we didn't have video, we didn't have microphones set. It was quite a circus trying to get the city business done that day just because of the repair that had to happen from that unexpected plumbing failure. That same pipe is all throughout the building. All of the plumbing in that building is 55 years old and it's failing. The problem is we just don't know when it's going to fail. And that's going to cause a problem anytime that it happens. So there are lots of urgent repairs there, and you have some information in your chair about the repairs that need to be made, and we're going to hear a presentation. You're going to see some pictures about the repairs that need to be made. But another important component is that we've looked at other options, and we're really looking forward to hearing your feedback tonight as we have a conversation with you about the repairs, how urgent they are, the different options that we have already considered. And some of those options have been outside of downtown, existing buildings available downtown. We've negotiated with a property owner downtown to move into an existing office building, and that negotiation went on for quite a while, and we were unable to reach a price that we thought would work for us here at the city. So a lot of those, obviously, negotiations have happened in the background. They aren't something we've done on the front page of the newspaper because that's not going to be to the city's advantage in negotiating that. We want to stay competitive. But now, as citizens, we want to have a conversation with you to hear your questions, to hear your ideas. Our timeline is more urgent than it has been just because those repairs need to be done. So, but we might hear something tonight that causes us, as a double check, causes us to want to investigate another idea, to run down the answer to a question. But what we know is that anytime we have a dialogue with citizens, it helps us be better informed in the decisions that we make. So with that introduction, Council, is there anything else that you would like to add before we have Jerry Danforth come and do a presentation on City Hall repairs needed? No? Okay, great. Then, Mr. City Manager, I'll pass it to you, and we're ready for our presentation. Just so everybody here knows what our order of show is tonight, Jerry will do the presentation, and then after his presentation, we might have some questions by the council, but then we have a list of people who have signed up to ask questions or make comments, and we'll begin to move through that list after the presentation.
Mayor, you nailed it. We're going to have Jerry make the presentation, questions from council, then allow people to come up and make comments. So, Jerry? I'll participate a little bit in the presentation as well.
Mayor, council, there we go. It's good to see you tonight. This presentation is very similar to the presentation we had at council meeting last Tuesday. There's some additional information for a little bit of background of how we ended up where we're at, how the information is kind of percolated through not only this council but the previous council as well, and the council before it having some of this information as well. Next slide, please. Of course, City Hall was built in 1966, making it 55 years old. The forefathers, when they built that, they built a great structure, but the life expectancy of that structure, I think we've realized it. Technology has changed dramatically since 1966, as evidenced by even the cars that we drive today, refrigeration systems, nothing's like what it used to be in 1966. Next slide, please. The replacement and maintenance for City Hall. This document represents what we shared with Council on August 8th, 2018. The issues that we're still bringing up are the same issues. You'll notice in this, the bullet points here, quite a bit of changing in pricing since those days. But we did list the chiller at that time, the Lochinvar boiler systems at that time. We did talk about the need to replace the piping for the boiler systems, rooftop cooling tower at that time. When you look at the age of this equipment, you start to realize we have greatly exceeded the life expectancy of what we have in place. Updated restrooms on all floors to meet ADA standards. As we said last week, ADA, we currently only meet ADA standards on the second floor of City Hall. The additional remodeling for parts of IT, purchasing and utility billing was discussed at that time, and building security was discussed at that time. Replacement of the front steps of City Hall, and to actually build a canopy to cover and protect those steps in our winter months, stop a lot of the icing that we have currently out there during the winter months that does create a problem, and also accelerates the deterioration of the walkways. Next slide, please. We talked about these issues in 2016 and 2018 in our CIP plans. It was part of our 5-year plans that we were going to address with City Hall. Keep in mind, during this time was when we were also building the Sims building at that time. The Sims building, we populated that at the end of 2016, and the City Council at that time asked us to look at the existing City Hall and see where our deficiencies were. At that time, we were talking once again about ADA standards. The drain lines and the water lines were failing even at that time. We have done a great deal of repairs to that, but there's a lot of it that is not accessible to us unless we physically go in there and tear out walls and bust concrete. We were talking about the outdated facilities and environmental control systems at that time, and that mechanical systems did not meet current building codes and did not meet what we needed to meet the new federal guidelines. So we knew that if we did touch any of this stuff, we would have to bring it up to new federal standards to meet those standards. And once again, this was from 2016 through 2018 we were having these discussions. Next slide, please. When we look at City Hall, the current City Hall as it is now, if we were to stay in the current City Hall, we would need at least 40,000 square foot of space remodeled. So that's the numbers that are represented there. New council chambers, as we've all experienced over the last several years, there has been many council meetings where we had to fill up as many as 2 to 3 overflow rooms in City Hall just to accommodate the public for those council meetings. That was part of the conversation looking at that. We also know that we do have some asbestos in City Hall that would need to be abated. We arrived at the 40,000 square foot number because we have remodeled certain areas of City Hall currently. So there would be no need to go back and readdress something that we've already brought up to standards. Next slide, please. The public restrooms, as we talked about, that's the number that we're looking at if we were to go in there and remodel all of those. Understand that it's not just a matter of remodeling what's there existing. It's the current spacing, current elevations that would be required for ADA, which means that the restroom facilities in City Hall would become smaller, not larger. Next slide, please. This is one of the restrooms for the public to see what we're talking about. The cast iron pipe is actually felling under the slab, and that's why you see the slab lifting up. As it rusts and corrodes, it expands, and that's why you see the cracking of the concrete and the flooring there. Next slide. This is another view of the same thing in a little bit different area. Next slide. This is the sinks that are in there, but I do want to point out the access panel right there below the sinks. That's where the cast iron is behind it. It's actually swollen and corroded to the point that it's actually pushing against the access panels. Next slide. Remodel of the elevators. The elevator system that we have in City Hall, while functional and we've been able to maintain it, understand that the controls for that elevator system in City Hall are old DC circuits. Control modules are no longer manufactured. They have to be remanufactured. When they fail, we ship them off to get them rebuilt or get a rebuilt one off the shelf if they've got one available. So anytime we look at an elevator system failure there, we would be looking at anywhere between a week to as much as 2.5 to 3 months. Next slide, please. Mechanical systems. One thing I did in the change for this presentation versus the council presentation, I highlighted in red here for you. If any of those systems that are highlighted in red actually fail at City Hall shuts down. I cannot populate the building if any of those systems are not currently working. The other thing that you need to keep in mind when we're looking at this, if I lose the chiller system and lose the capacity to cool City Hall, IT no longer works, and neither does the phone switch system that's in City Hall. The other things that we've talked about previously, so we'll go past those points. Next, please. Mayor, this is what you were referring to earlier in your conversation with the public. This is the sanitary line that's underneath the IT main server in City Hall. There was solid waste actually bubbling back up out of that. One of the problems that I've got with this area of City Hall, of course, the sensitivity of the equipment that's there and the way it affects the entire network of City Hall. If we lose that, basically we lose connectivity to all of our structures. It's not just City Hall that goes down. The phone switch that's in City Hall actually connects all of our city operations together. If we lose that, we lose everything. The other thing is because that cast iron is failing, typically a lot of people would say, well, just run a sewer snake down there and clean it up. We can't run a sewer snake through cast iron that's failing. The problem is if we do it, and we punch a hole in that line, it fails, and then we're shut down. So the only way that we could actually get this addressed was with a water purge, and we can't even do it with a high-pressure jet system because, once again, we would take out the cast iron pipe.
I think just to put it in perspective, what the challenge there is, we could fix it. It'd be an expensive project, cut slab and things. If we try to push through with a jet or a snake or something like that, we're going to cause a full collapse instead of a partial collapse. Right now, we do have the ability to move fluids through there, but it's really nip-tuck, and so it's really kind of emblematic of the just trying to baby it along before we do a very, very expensive project on it.
Very, very correct. Next slide, please. These are the sump systems. You actually have two 750-gallon sump systems that sit in the basement of City Hall where all of the waste goes to, and then it's pumped out of City Hall back at an elevation. The sewer lines are at a higher elevation, obviously, than what the basement is at City Hall, so everything has to be pulled into a sump system. These are steel tanks that are of the same age of the cast iron, so you can imagine we're experiencing the same kind of failures there. Next, please. These are the boiler systems that you referred to earlier. You can see we're still missing two of the boilers. We were able to source a boiler and get it up and running. The boiler that is existing there is running at about 40% capacity of what it was when it was brand new. Just as a little bit of background while we're on the boilers and looking at this situation, you came within 2 days of catastrophic failure of City Hall. Had we not been able to acquire that from another city facility and put in there, this happened before our deep freeze. And it is, as a little bit of information, we had several city buildings that we did experience failures on. as far as the fire suppression lines and water lines frozen, busted. Had we not been able to do this, you were within 2 days of freezing City Hall. If we freeze City Hall, that means we lose all of the loop systems that provide both heating and cooling in that facility, as well as all the water systems. So that when it would have thawed, we would have been in there doing a total replacement on everything. Next slide, please. The chiller system, as we referenced earlier, this is an R22 system. The federal government has deemed that R22 is being phased out. It's no longer the refrigerant of choice for us. The fact that we have a chiller system in its day was probably the most efficient system that you could put into a structure this size. However, if it fails, you lose all cooling. So that's the situation we're in. Once again, everything that runs off of this chiller, not only the refrigerant component itself, but all the piping and everything that goes to the cooling towers on the roof are once again steel pipes that we're experiencing corrosion on. Next slide, please. The generator that we currently have there is a 75 kVA generator. For emergency operations, if City Hall is networked into our EOC, we only have enough power there to maintain the IT component, the phone component, and a couple of offices at City Hall. The rest of City Hall is shut down because we do not have enough backup power there. This generator that's in there right now is currently 30 years old as well. Next slide, please. What you see here is actually the patch out in front of City Hall. Coincidentally, it failed on a Sunday or a Saturday. Fortunately, the baseball team notified us that there was a problem with it, and we were able to get it secured before opening business on Monday there at City Hall, because we had a cavity that was quite substantial right in the main drive of City Hall. Keep in mind, this is the sanitary sewer system that connects back to City Hall that those lift pumps pump into. So we actually had a failure there as well. Next slide. When we look at City Hall, if we do, as Mr. Stanley pointed out, Councilman Stanley pointed out at the last meeting, we get to certain levels, we have to bring the current building back up to current building codes. When we hit those levels, that means we've got to mark towards meeting the energy codes of not only the city, the state, and the federal government. We would not meet those codes. So if we start doing some of these major rehabs and get close to those numbers, we would have to do these components as well. Understand that City Hall, when it was built in '66, did not have the efficient windows, did not have the insulation values required in building codes back in those days. And so consequently, we do not have a very efficient building as far as operations, and the cost to run City Hall is quite substantial from an energy standpoint. Next. The front entrance, we did talk about the front entrance. We would be looking at demo of that front entrance, installation of a covered entrance, ADA approaches. Next slide, please. And this is what we're talking about. We're seeing concrete failure. The structural concrete under the tile steps is actually failing on us. We're starting to see the corrosion of the rebar. Corrosion of the concrete is literally falling and crumbling under us there. That's why we haven't done much repair there, because what we're looking at is a major expenditure right now. We have maintained access. ADA access is still there. We do have limited access off to one side so that we can keep City Hall open. But this is the situation that we do have to address and do have to deal with. Next slide. And there's another view of the same situation with the limited access. Next slide. And the next slide. Flood control and structural on the east side. New sump pump system, cast iron replacement, and new structure with freight elevators and architectural engineering. Next slide, please. This slide was attached. This is actually from our airport when we did experience the 100-year flood there at the airport. Next slide. Those of you that have utilized our airport realize that this is where you come and pick people up on the underside of the airport. There's a basement down there below the airport. The basement was totally submerged during that 100-year flood. If you'll notice, the parking lot is dry. Unfortunately, City Hall is built much in the same type scenario that we have here. Next slide. There's a main ramp that we receive deliveries into City Hall. If we have a 100-year flood in downtown Amarillo, we do not have the capacity to keep the water from getting into City Hall currently. The cast iron drainage system is also corroded like we have inside the structure. We have a sump system there, but it is not adequate for what we have. A lot of our construction back in the 60s was built with different assumptions than what we currently build for today. If we were to even put in a new sump system here, I'm not sure where we would pump it to. The problem is if we pump it into the parking lot and I'm dealing with a 100-year flood, it just circles around and comes back into the ramp system. For us to pump that to a storm drain that would be able to handle that, our assumption is that the storm drains are going to be able to handle it. Well, a lot of our drainage in this area of town is surface drainage relying on the streets. The 100-year flood would not address that. Next slide, please. This is a picture of where we have failing of the structural concrete there. Next slide. What you're looking at, currently we have built a plywood decking underneath there to stop the concrete from falling on employees, delivery people there. But we are obviously looking at a great deal of failure from both the rebar and the concrete. Next slide. This is just a continuation of that same area, but I do want you to take notice. The seam at the end of the bridge that you see there, the concrete slab itself is actually separating and starting to settle. And you're starting to see that on the corner of City Hall on the northeast side. Next slide. Once again, another piece of that structural failure. Next slide. Next. Other costs that we don't have currently represented, but we know are going to be expensive. We do know that IT, as it currently sits in City Hall, needs about a $320,000 current upgrade for operations in City Hall. Relocation of IT or during a renovation of City Hall to another facility, we're looking at a cost of, and this is an estimated cost of $4.1 million. It's because we would have to buy new gear. We would have to do a dedicated fiber optic connection. And depending on what the location was, that number could be elevated quite quickly. Unknown failures requiring immediate action. Of course, we can't see inside the walls currently. We do know that we have some structural remediation and repairs that would need to be done on the north side where the City Hall is actually part of the park itself. The construction back in the day did not deal with sealing the walls from moisture like it does currently today. Basically, during that time, it was a tar seal that was placed on the concrete. That has failed. That's why when we do get heavy rain situations or even intermittent irrigation of the park, we will see water actually coming in through the walls in the basement of City Hall. Next slide, please. This is one of the far northeast corner, and you can see where the concrete has actually started settling there and popping off the fascia on the wall, retaining wall there. Next slide. There you can see where the concrete has actually started settling, and it has settled substantially in that area. The slab next to City Hall has actually collapsed and fallen away. Next slide. And I'll turn this over to Jared to kind of go through some of the timelines of events going forward.
All right, so just want to walk through not just the timeline. This stuff that's right here is the timeline about the acquisition of the Amarillo Hardware Building, but predating that, we had decades where we were using the building and most of the city staff was working out of our existing City Hall building. That level of crowding made it very difficult to do any major rehab projects on the facility, just because of the impact on operations. We built the Sims building because of those challenges. which did create a little bit of capacity inside City Hall, which was relatively quickly filled up. If you remember, the parking lot that used to be on the south side of City Hall extended from about the base path between second base and third base at the MPEV all the way to the front of City Hall. So there was a lot of additional people here. That was a huge parking lot. So we put the ballpark in, where we moved people into the Sims building, put the ballpark in. The council from 15 to 17, that city council began serious evaluation of City Hall modifications to be able to prolong the life of that facility after they moved some of the staff into Sims. Those estimates were, at that time, again, that was 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, between 17 million and 29 million, depending on what level of rehab, all the way up to expansion and remodel of the City Hall building. City Council from 17 to 21 reviewed City Hall on a number of occasions, and ultimately through the Civic Center evaluation process and the process of working with citizens to evaluate and establish what the scope of the project would be for the November of 2020 bond election. All of that time was spent establishing what a preferred course of action was. We have also, now with the change in council, with the change of place one, we've been working through this some more. The steps that we've taken to this date, though, is based on guidance issued by council during that 17 to 21 period. So there is no desire to move super fast, notwithstanding input from Councilmember Stanley. Really didn't know how to phrase that, didn't want to phrase it badly. But there's a lot of momentum on that. When asked during the presentations regarding the Civic Center, what happens if the bond election fails with regard to the Civic Center, to the City Hall rather? The answer at those times was always, we don't know exactly. We know that question is going to have to be answered, and it's not going to be free. It will be a costly project, whether it's done at the same time as the Civic Center project or whether it's done as a standalone project. Because of that need and that requirement to be able to address those needs that are not cheap, it was a very intentional move made on everyone's part to make sure that the City Hall project and all the components associated with it were not a component of the Civic Center project or the Civic Center bond from a general obligation bond election standpoint, which does preserve the opportunity to take care of the projects, whatever the scope the council chooses to do, through whatever means we have to with regard to City Hall. It is a problem that's going to have to be answered. So once we get to 2019, after the bond election has been solidified and council has a good idea and the community has a good idea of what would happen with the Civic Center if that, what would happen with City Hall if that Civic Center bond election was successful, we then began the process of evaluating locations for a City Hall project. Looked at 7 different existing facilities, also discussed new construction. At that time, they didn't want to take on the path of new construction because it is more expensive than rehab. Also wanted to make sure that everyone understood that whatever we would do with the City Hall project would be done from a reasonable, from a reuse of existing facilities standpoint, so that we're not ignoring available space. But like I said, we did look at 7 different facilities, existing buildings, mostly downtown, but we also looked outside of downtown. So based upon the Civic Center Committee conversations, council focused on land acquisitions. You can see that fall of 19. January of 20, council reviewed multiple scenarios for potential relocation, including those buildings that I talked about, and also including some existing city facilities that the city owns, including the Central Library location right across the street, modifying and expanding the Santa Fe Depot site, looking at some historic buildings downtown, which is sort of the direction that was landed on with regard to Amarillo Hardware, and then looking at some other more modern listed buildings downtown, along with other buildings that we looked at. Along with the Zachary building, which was for sale for a long time. I mean, it was no secret that we looked at that one as well. September of 2020, council authorized me to enter into a real estate contract for the Amarillo Hardware properties. September 10 of 2020, we executed the contract, closed in November, and then, as we've done in recent meetings, the resolution was approved to publish notice of intention to issue certificates of obligation, and we advertised that twice recently. So it's a very long I would say, decades-long process to get where we're at, but very intense process since 2015 to have very refined options for what we're looking at right now. Those prices have changed as time has gone by and as inflation has happened. But you can see if you go to the renovation cost comparison, which is the last slide prior to the question slide, we do have a comparison of existing City Hall project, Amarillo Hardware project. The main differences are the customer service aspect of the drive-through, the expansion space that will be available in the Amarillo Hardware site, as opposed to no expansion available here at the existing City Hall, and then the parking differences and the structural challenges. The other component is the bottom right. It does allow space for future Civic Center expansion if we were ever to do the Civic Center project at some point in the future. So with that said, Mayor, Council, Jerry and I are available to answer any questions or anybody else that you need from the staff team that's here, and then we'll be able to go to comments from the community.
Council, do we have questions for Jerry? This is information that y'all have heard multiple times, but if there was anything you wanted to highlight or follow up on?
Jerry, just a few questions. So you looked at new construction as an option?
We did with our limited, we always looked at what we owned as far as property in hand first to see what was available. As Mr. Miller mentioned, we looked at the Santa Fe Depot, a rehab of that facility, potentially converting Central Library, that facility. Open lots in downtown are obviously limited, so we didn't see anything that was currently available with enough parking to be able to build a new structure on.
So did you do a cost analysis on what the new construction was going to cost at the time, or was it just not that we didn't have the land available at the time?
We didn't have land available, and then also the other issue that we were talking about at the time was what would be the most economic and long-term, and then also taking into account the historical features of downtown that a lot of the public wanted protected at that time.
So if you were to look at new construction, do you have an option of where you could put it? Like, refresh my memory, Amarillo Hardware and 3 other buildings around it, is that correct, were purchased?
We do own actually 3 structures there. We own the entire city block that Amarillo Hardware sits on. Amarillo Hardware is 142,000 square feet. City Hall is currently 82,000 square feet. So the ability to remodel that and have growth was appealing to take a look at from an existing structural standpoint. The other facilities would not have accommodated the square footage needed for a remodel or an enhancement.
And on the Amarillo Hardware building, you know, it is a really good structural building. It's got a lot of curb appeal from an old industrial style warehouse. I see the appeal and all that. The structural concrete columns that are throughout the building, the only issue that I really see there, not in office spaces, but in chamber, the council chamber. Do you have an idea? You know, I know we had talked about a potential, you know, addition up on the roof. Is that still the best look at it, or do you have another option? And what did you represent in the $35 million as far as the council chambers go?
Well, we absolutely have more options available than the roof. The roof is one of the options we're looking at. All of those options actually will be fleshed out by council. There'll be 2 to 3 options that we will bring to council, and council will give us direction on which way they want us to go with regards to construction there at Amarillo Hardware. And I'm sorry, what was your other question?
Well, if the $35 million included the additional square footage that could go up on the roof for the chamber.
Yes, it did. It did, and we always looked at that development. And I'll circle kind of back to the chiller conversation we had earlier, and some of the construction methods that we use currently far exceed what we have at City Hall. So when we looked at cutting out space inside that structure, if you'll notice it in the presentation that I had before council, not last Tuesday, but the Tuesday before, when we looked at those numbers, we looked at what does that incorporate, and then how many additional square feet would the city have available to either lease out or develop. And we were looking at between 25 and 30,000 additional square feet. That would not be developed in any construction plan. It would be developed to the point to where it would be adaptable quickly from the mechanical and operational standpoint, but as far as furniture and fixtures, FF&E, as we refer to, that would not have been part of that component. In the construction number, though, we did have represented FF&E. We also had represented a small amount of asbestos abatement. We also had represented demolition of 3 of the structures, 2 parking lots, and to meet downtown design standard streetscape in all of those areas.
And I think to Councilmember Staines' question on the council chamber, it wouldn't be new square footage on the roof. It would be cutting the roof so that we could then raise the ceiling height for a meeting space. It wouldn't be, obviously, it wouldn't be as high as this, but it would create the ceiling space and create the ability to install some spans so that we could get rid of address the structural requirements while still not having those sightline impediments in there. So it would be existing square footage, it'd just be taller and would address some of the column issues we would have there. I think that's what they were saying. We didn't engineer it. Obviously, we kind of worked through it with the people that put the renderings together for us, and they were pretty confident we would be able to do that. So it was not new square footage on the roof, it's just cutting into the roof to raise the height of that space.
I don't know how many days it's been since May 1st. About 8 weeks. But you've done it. You've now asked questions that none of us asked, because that's all new information to the 4 of us. So I just wanted to put a stake in the sand for you and say, well done, good questions. I know it feels like all the time we're saying, yeah, we've already covered that. Yeah, we've already covered that. Well, now you're forging us into new territory, because that we have talked about that as a site. We have not done any specifics about what the design would look like or anything. So,
well, thank you. And to my own benefit, like, I misunderstood you. I thought we were adding on up on top of the roof.
It would have been one of the options we would have presented, yes.
Well, and with Jared, that makes better sense. You know, you'd have one, large skylight, more or less, that would alleviate those columns that would be in the way, because that's really the big drawback that you see over there. Is there's maybe every 30 feet there's a structural concrete column that's in the way.
And that's true on the old part of Amarillo hardware. The newer, more modern part is not that way. We do not have the column interference that we have on
the center's much wider on the new part.
Do we have any issues with the age of Amarillo hardware in the building? I mean, was it built in the 30s? Probably late 20s,
in the
early
late 30s. No, we don't. One of the interesting things about it, one of the detriments to City Hall, is that it actually has a park next to it, and so we're constantly have green space where we get water infiltration. That did not occur over at Amarillo hardware. The other thing is it was designed and constructed for massive weights to be stored there. I mean, it was steel, a lot of steel was stored inside that building. And the construction of that building, you can see it. It's obvious inside there. So it does lend itself to future development because of the way that it was built. And we don't see the structural issues there that we do see in our current City Hall.
And then my last question would just be with IT, and I don't want to read into it too much, but like, do we have an urgency to try to move IT out of the basement? Like, I know we're talking about building and our options, and we want to look at everything, but do we have a separate issue in the way of, are you forewarning saying, guys, you really need to pay attention, like we need to look for another building? Where could they go? Have you looked at other options just in the here and now? Because I do know that, the Amarillo hardware building will be 2 to 3 years out. Rolling the dice with the infrastructure that we've got. What is your feeling on that?
Okay, I'm going to answer you in a political way. First and foremost, we are absolutely looking at it. It is part of a conversation that occurs every week that we're dealing with it. But because of security issues, I can't answer some of those questions in a public forum. But we are absolutely looking at it, and we have made great steps since the construction of the Sims building to alleviate some of those issues and to give us backup capabilities that did not exist 5 years ago. We do have some of that in place. The biggest weakness we have, though, is in a couple of components in the system that are strictly reliant on City Hall.
And I would also add, it's an extremely expensive project. So financially, it's in our interest to figure out, or to have a good guidance from council on what direction we're going so that we can steer in that direction and spend once rather than twice. If we did putting them in a standalone location probably isn't a long-term solution. It isn't a long-term solution. It needs to be a component of City Hall. So whether we're doing a major remodel here, moving them out of the basement in a project that happens here, or whether we put them into Amarillo Hardware, or if there's something another direction the council chooses to go, we know where we would land them in a new Amarillo Hardware project. We know that we would relocate during a major remodel here. But how we do that, how we flip the switch on it, there's a lot of things that are in the air on that. So it's an expensive project, no matter how we do it. I would prefer to, and I think all of council would too. I'm not saying that like anybody wouldn't, but having a real good, clear guidance from council before we took a step to do a temporary relocate of IT, to be able to make sure that we have a long-term solution rather than putting them in a standalone location and then bringing them into City Hall during a future project.
Most of our construction and conversations along those lines, almost all of our construction questions and infrastructure questions, we definitely try to do a 20 to 30 year look ahead on anything that we're doing, understanding that as technology changes, so does our demands and our abilities. So that partnership in the city is a fantastic partnership. Anybody involved in development or construction, all of those groups get together to have that conversation. And like I said, that conversation's been in existence for the last 4 years.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I appreciate your thoroughness on it.
You bet.
It's helpful.
Any questions from this side of the room?
Yes.
Yes? Councilmember Smith?
What is your game plan if any of these 7 items that are in red go out? Are they out for a day or a month? We got to keep City Hall moving on.
Correct. We've looked at several disaster scenarios. COVID has changed the conversation on a lot of what we're looking at now. Anybody in construction realizes that some of these components that we're looking at from a construction standpoint, we're looking at 2 to 3 month delivery times on them. That doesn't include the construction that it would take to actually install the equipment. If we look at the loop systems inside of City Hall, once we take those out, I think I shared with the mayor, really our cooling system in City Hall is the equivalent of a 55-year-old refrigerator sitting in your house. That's what we've got. And we're making it work, and we continue to make it work. But if it fails, all of a sudden, I don't have the capacity to just pull a part out and stick a part in. I've got to look at a remodel. If I do that, then all of a sudden I've got to meet current energy codes. And when I do that, that means I'm having to insulate the building, put new windows inside the building. And that's just one of the examples. If the boiler system, like I said, had failed, Councilman Smith, quite frankly, I think the earliest I could have got City Hall back up and operational, we were probably looking at 90 to 120 days.
Got to be quicker than that.
Yeah. Yeah, it keeps us up at night worrying about it. Yes.
IT and all that.
Excuse me?
We need to continue to function. Get
Yes.
water bills out. IT needs to function. I'm following up with what Cole Stanley was bringing up, sort of. But
Right.
think about all of those 7 things.
And we're constantly working on that. If we see an issue, most of the time, you as a council don't realize that the problem exists until it gets to the point where I'm reaching out to the city manager saying, hey, we've got a potential major catastrophe fixing to hit us. If we can mediate it, and we've done that at the direction of the city manager, keep me operational until we can make a decision. And we have done that. We have tried to keep it at the forefront of everybody's thoughts, realizing, hey, this problem could happen. Like I said, this year we just about had it happen. We were within 2 days. Fortunately, we were able to source something that we had in another structure to make it work. we've had the same issues happen in IT, and they've been flexible enough to make those changes and make those moves. You know, we update the city manager and say, this is what we were able to accomplish, but realize these problems are very real, and this infrastructure, there's no getting around. That's how many miles we have on this building, and we use it 6 days a week. I know that it's not open to the public 6 days a week, but we use it 6 days a week. And the customer service that we try to provide, we try not to impact the public. And through our building automation and a lot of our monitoring systems, generally we'll know about it in the middle of the night, and we've got guys working on it before the doors ever open. So we feel like we've done a pretty good job of keeping us to this point. I'm just cautioning you, we're at the point now to where I can't put a whole lot of more patches on what I've already got patches on.
This page shows 3.5 to 5.5 million to take care of those items.
Mm-hmm.
So should we count on having to spend that if it's going to take 2 or 3 years to get into the hardware building?
No, because like I said, this is all about the risk, and you've got to know the risk that you have in order for you to make a good business decision. This is about you as a council making a business decision going forward, and what risk are you willing to take. We have been able to mediate it. If we get an issue that's coming close, we will definitely be notifying the city manager, and he'll be on the phone. Obviously, Mayor, you've received several of those phone calls, but we don't sound the alarm. We try not to be the little boy that cried wolf. Obviously, we've been dealing with this from a maintenance standpoint on that facility since we built the Sims building, because that's when we did the deep evaluation of it. That's when we started realizing, hey, we've got some components within this structure that are way past what the industry standards would identify as useful years. We've taken all of those steps. We work on the chiller system in the wintertime, and we work on the boiler systems in the summertime so that we can get as close as we can to be operational. There are, however, some components, Councilman Smith, if that cast iron fails and it's under slab, the only thing I can do is saw cut concrete and do some kind of sump system, some kind of mediation. We've got contingency plans in place for it. But if we're looking, the numbers you're looking at, if you want me to put it back in like it's new and you want to continue to exist in the current City Hall, those are the minimum numbers you're looking at. Otherwise, you're looking at mediate it, keep the expenses as low as you can until we get into a new structure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. We appreciate your presentation. Most importantly, we appreciate that City Hall is still operating. Patches on top of patches, or, contingency plans on top of contingency plans. So we appreciate the work that you and your staff do to keep it going. Jen, at this time, can you just tell us how many people we have signed up to speak?
We have 8 people.
8? Okay. This meeting was scheduled to go 6 to 7. Obviously, we started late because of our own technical difficulties. So I think we still have time to go ahead, if it's okay with you guys, council, to give each person the 3 minutes to speak, and then
Yes.
we can wrap it up. But so, Jen, I'll hand the microphone to you to moderate those speakers, please.
Okay. Thank you for participating in today's City Council, the Community Solutions meeting. Your input and your opinions are important to us, and we are glad you're here to share them. At each posted meeting, we invite our fellow community members to address City Council regarding posted agenda items. To ensure all who wish to speak are able to, we limit each speaker's time to 3 minutes. At the end of 2.5 minutes, a warning beep will sound from the moderator table, so you have time to wrap up your thoughts. In accordance with the Open Meetings Act and state law, speakers are asked to limit their comments to items on the posted agenda. Doing so will ensure we are all following the guidelines and able to have an effective, beneficial meeting for all. Thank you for your consideration for this process and your valuable input. The first speaker will be Michael Ford, and next up will be London Cope.
If you're the next up speaker, if you don't mind just moving to one of these front row seats, that'll just help us roll it a little more efficiently.
Did somebody tell you I had
There's
a volleyball
Lyndon.
lesson at 8? Is that why you put me first? Is that what? I'm just curious. This appears to be the second time we've heard this, and it doesn't get any better on the second telling. We heard this essentially on the same presentation on May 25th, and it's still shocking. And I feel sorry for the folks at the city. Jerry's done a great job trying to put options together, and I would just say your employees deserved a hell of a lot better. This is really shocking just to go through this and hear that since 2018 we put a $2 million, I think, drainage system over for the ballpark, and we don't have a drainage system that's adequate over there that'll inundate that facility there. We made a decision to go spend on a luxury when we didn't have the facility necessary or the capability necessary for an essential. So it just really shocks the mind that we're here right now, and your options are very limited because you chose under Proposition A to go forth and package everything, and inside that package is a $22 million relocation of city services element to that project, and you're going to have an interesting time in the upcoming court case, Mr. City Manager, because I don't know that the court's going to agree with you on that interpretation. So we are where we are right now, but it's interesting that we've been getting, this is 2016, 2018, 2020, 2021. You got a call in February or January, and the first time this emergency appeared on a city agenda was May 25th, after the election. And so I'm wondering why we're only discussing this now when it should have been discussed in this, certainly in the emergency that we're hearing now, in the critical infrastructure that's crumbling, the concrete's crumbling. We're going to see fecal matter in the cable traces in the IT chamber, in the IT areas. Why this is only being discussed now? It should have been discussed in December, in January, in February, in March. Make the case to the people that they need to understand what's going on. But we come now, May 25th, the first time we heard this. And so it just, to me, it just boggles the mind. This is an issue of leadership. This is an issue of priority. I don't even see it. Is that the time?
You have 30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay. Well, I appreciate the hard work of the city employees, and I know that they're doing a really good job under difficult circumstances. But the options are very, very limited and very bleak, and I do feel sorry for them for having to work through this. But hopefully something can be done, and something of a legal nature, a legal option. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Up next is London Colt, and after that will be Robin Leah.
Thank you for allowing me to address you today. I just want to say I think the timing of this is all a little bit tone deaf. We just came off a pandemic. People had to close their businesses. People, have incurred the increased price of goods and services. I don't know if you guys have been to the grocery store lately, but things are up about 30%. Gas is up. Any kind of, as little as it may seem to you, tax increase is daunting for the average taxpayer as myself. And especially with the year we're coming off of, it's a little tone deaf, a little rough. But I agree with what Michael said. We're here, we're stuck. I think we're going to have to do something. It's obviously in disrepair. Some suggestions I might, pose to the council is let's be creative. I feel like the options we've been given are a little limited. Can we open up? So where are the estimates for these costs coming? Can we do open bidding? Let's get all of our local contractors in the mix. Everybody put a bid in. Let's stimulate this economy. Let's give people some jobs. I bet you that we could hit these bids for pennies on the dollar if we could give some people some work around here. Let's get all our local artisans, our local construction companies an opportunity to bid on these jobs. I think it would be easy to get a list of repairs needed or a list of jobs to move and get open bidding going. Let's get local small business companies involved in this You're going to get people involved and get them proud to say, hey, I had a hand in making that. Let's be creative, because I feel like these options are very limited, but I do feel like we are stuck where we're at now. And I feel like you owe it to the people, especially after the year that we've had, to really go with the cheapest option. No matter whether it's $100,000 cheaper, you need to go for it. Just because this year has been devastating to many of us economically. So, I know a move to Amarillo Hardware and a brand new sparkly building sounds really nice, but is it a luxury that we can afford after a year like 2020? I don't know. I would just pose that to you to be very considerate of the average taxpayer and what we've just been through this year. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
While Robin's coming to the microphone, Mr. City Manager, can you just field that question about where are those estimates coming from?
The estimates for both the repairs and new construction are based upon our recent experience with doing similar projects, whether it's new construction. We've had a lot of construction projects over the last handful of years, whether they're Prop 2 projects from 2016, or the ballpark, or rather the IMPEV, or the parking garage. A number of different facilities we've built recently. So we have a lot of recent experience with actual construction costs using local vendors, and I 100% agree with that. Then, as far as the other facilities, adaptive reuse of something like Amarillo Hardware, while it would be refreshed and renewed, we were very intentional, or council was very intentional about not wanting to look at new construction, one because of the price and one because of the message it sends. So we wanted to adaptively reuse something, whether it was a historic building or something that was already existing in downtown. So did I hit the areas that you
and
wanted?
then if you'll just hit on the bidding process too, it's unfortunately challenging. There are legal restrictions on how we can do, because I love the creative thought for London. Where are you? Oh, I see you now. I love the creative thought of how to involve small businesses, especially small local businesses. There are some very defined legal parameters for how we accept and work through the bid process. So.
And if we're doing small repairs of single components and not cracking up a larger program into multiple small bids, we can bring in local small businesses to be able to do that small project. When we have as the scope grows, it quickly exceeds the capabilities of a small business, and you start looking at a very small handful of larger local businesses that can handle those projects. We have a lot of great construction companies and trades companies that have the capabilities of doing some of our larger scope projects, as evidenced by, a lot of recent construction we've done. But we do have legal bidding requirements that can tie our hands in certain cases. Below a certain dollar amount, we have the ability to use a local vendor even when they're up to 5% more expensive than, say, an out-of-town bidder on that same project. But when you get into the scale of these projects, we don't have that capability, so we have to go with the lowest qualified bidder. So I don't say the lowest bidder, because a lot of times you'll get a bid from a company that doesn't have the capabilities or the bandwidth to be able to do a project. So I use the term lowest qualified bidder, not as a cagey comment, but as the actual legal definition of what we have to consider as we're looking at a large construction project. So we very much try to steer these projects to local vendors, and in our contracts, for example, with the IMPEV, inside that contract, regardless of who the construction company was that won that bid, they had requirements to use local contractors as much as possible. Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 80% of the work that was done on that, the actual people working on that project, were people that live local. Over 80%. Okay. It's about 85. So I knew it was over 80. I couldn't remember the exact number. So everything we've done in the past is a good indicator of what we're going to do going forward. I'm sorry, I know you're standing there getting tired. Maybe I'm going on and on. But we are very much focused on anything we do using local people and local companies every time we can, legally.
But we legally must follow that bidding process. And that lays a playing field for everyone to have the same opportunity to do the work that's being paid for by taxpayer dollars. So, okay, Jen, our next speaker.
Robin Leah is up, and after that is Gary Jennings.
Thanks for your patience.
Sure. Okay, when reading solutions for City Hall, you keep mentioning how old the facilities are. Many of us in the city, including me, live in homes that are this age or older. My home was built in 1953. So when I hear you talking about galvanized metal and cast iron plumbing, I had that problem, had to replace all of my plumbing, get a new gas line, get a new water line. I made repairs to my existing home. So many of us find it's cheaper to repair than to rebuild. The building you're talking about, the Amarillo Hardware building, isn't any younger. I mean, it's in the 20s, as I'm understanding. It was built in the 20s. And so, in light of spending this kind of money, many of the citizens, including me, feel we have more pressing matters, such as paying, and this is a big thing for me, paying our 911 operators more money an hour. Helping our firefighters, let them make more money, our police officers, our garbage people who pick up our garbage. I feel like that more represents the city and the citizens and what we want than having new offices for y'all. I mean, I'm sorry. And I feel like the certificate of obligations is kind of sneaky. I feel like you're saying to me, I don't trust your opinion. I don't think you really know what you're talking about, so I'm not going to put it up for a vote. We know what's best, and we're going to just do what we want to do. And so I know the money has to come from somewhere, and I suspect it's going to be coming from my property taxes. I would much rather my property taxes and any money that I'm giving be towards that than new offices. I say repair it. Why haven't you been maintaining it up to this point? That's what I've had to do with my house. I was doing little repairs. I had to go through concrete. I had flooding under my house. You repair them, and then eventually you have to replace all of it. I say go with the repairs. It's much cheaper than $35 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leah. Gary Jennings is up, and then after that is Beth Duke.
Yes, good evening. I'd like to thank the mayor and city council for having this special meeting for the citizens. And I wanted to thank Jerry Danforth for that presentation of the existing conditions at City Hall. I had just read about it in the newspaper, and I knew it was essentially falling down, but I did not realize what dire condition the building is in. And it is just it's facing catastrophic failure, in my opinion. And as a dedicated historic preservationist, I'm 100% in favor of you remodeling the Amarillo Hardware building. As a matter of fact, after Sally and I opened up the historic Firestone building in December of 17, I had actually inquired myself about the Amarillo Hardware building, but lo and behold, the seller would not break up the 5 parts. So I certainly couldn't afford to buy the whole thing. And as I sit out there and watch the sod poodles out there at Hodgetown, I sit behind third base with viewing to the east, and right there at my eyesight is the Amarillo Hardware building. And I think this is just a golden opportunity that will not come along again to move and modernize City Hall into that iconic historic building. I think it will be a true gem. I think if you're going to have to spend millions and millions on redoing City Hall, the best business move would be to move to the Amarillo Hardware building. And I'm 100% for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Up next is Beth Duke, and after that is James Skank.
Good evening. I'm Beth Duke, and I'm Executive Director of Center City of Amarillo. And Center City, you know, but not everyone knows, Center City is the Main Street organization for Amarillo. And we are proudly recognized by Texas Main Street and National Main Street as organizations that are working with our community to save our historic downtowns and our other historic neighborhoods. And part of our mission, we're governed by the Texas Historical Commission. So I want to thank you for saving the iconic Amarillo Hardware Building. It's one of my favorite buildings. We photographed it zillions of times, all different lights. It's one of my favorite buildings. And I also want to thank you for your efforts to keep City Hall downtown. I really believe we are the center of the city. We are the heart of the city. And generally, unless there's a little traffic jam or some of those great orange cones, you can get anywhere in about 12 minutes to downtown. And I think that's something we can be proud of. But the iconic Amarillo Hardware Building, when you save a historic building, you're saving part of our history. It keeps the building out of a landfill, and it gives the building a new life. And in my speeches at Center City, I always say, you never want your city to develop like a donut, because what's in the middle of a donut? Nothing. You want your city to develop like a cinnamon roll, because what's the very best part of a cinnamon roll? The middle. And thank you for thinking of downtown and this iconic building. I got to say, I know that Jerry Danforth and Jared Miller can work miracles, but based on some of the slides, kind of looks like we're might be running close to running out of miracles. So thank you for your time, and thank you for investing in our city and not kicking this particular can down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Next is James Skank, and after that is Jason Tillery.
Before I get started, you were breaking your own rule about talking back on your thing. Anyway, all good government begins at the local level, and so does all bad government. One thing that's happening right now, we're experiencing some bad government planning within our local, because these plans have been, we haven't repaired. That's what I call bad landlording. I do a little bit of that, and when something breaks down, you replace it then. You start taking care of it then. You don't wait. Right now, we seem like we just want to move so fast, we're not considering the many other plans that could be considered, like new construction, like giving yourself a tax abatement somewhere at some location, you know, which I'm sure you will. And then we had the false advertising in this Civic Center bond. To us, the people were following it very hard. Sure, there may have been a CO separation to where you're allowed to do this within the next 3 years, but it was false advertising. It was really presented terribly, even to those, because all of that money is taxpayer money. All of that is tax revenue. Ones on property tax would increase. The COs are just from current revenue you're going to have somewhere stashed. I'm not really sure. So there needs to be some more planning. One of the things that's coming up tomorrow, because we seem so urgent on this, is a special meeting to meet to consider $2 million to a California firm to come in and do architectural and engineering, it seems like. That's not local. That's not talking to our local people. It's $2 million. Wow. Where'd you get that idea? We need to see more options. New construction shouldn't cost that much, about $35 million for whatever needs the city would have. The hardware building, which most people have talked to already, is a lot older than City Hall. And to think that it's more structurally sound, there's bridges for sale, but maybe it would work. I don't know. I don't think it would. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skank. Up next is Jason Tillery, and after that is Timothy Ingles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Manager, City Council members. Mr. Danforth, thank you for that presentation. It was quite eye-opening as how bad that building is. Spent 20 years in the Navy, sir. On every ship I was on, the Navy gave just enough to do Band-Aids instead of doing real repairs, so I understand where you're coming from. I guess my actual question is, this could have been put on the ballot in May during the municipal elections. My question is, why wasn't it? Because I think with that presentation, the citizens would have voted overwhelmingly in favor of this, because this is taxpayers' money at the end of the day. I think that we should continue to look at options such as new construction. My job at Pantex is to do scheduling and cost analysis on construction projects. Most of my jobs that I work on out there are disposition and demolition projects, because we can build new construction to take care of issues that instead of refurbishing an old building, we tear down old buildings and build new ones because they're more cost effective, because we build them right from the ground up. My question, though, again, is why wasn't it put on the ballot for citizens to vote on? And in closing, Mr. Miller, I had an opportunity to meet your son a few weeks ago at a neighbor's house. We talked about him joining the Navy. Sharp young man. If he has any questions, send them my way.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tillery. Up next is Timothy Ingles, and that will be our last speaker for tonight.
Hello, Council. Thank you all for the presentation. Thank you specifically, sorry I forgot your name, but thank you for that. Very good to see. I came here because I felt like I wanted to put my name in the hat for trying to save City Hall, the existing City Hall. I think it's a historic building. I think it's a unique building, not quite my style, but I really do enjoy it. And I also have similar misgivings around, a building built in the 30s being cheaper to renovate than a building built in the 50s or 60s. And then on top of that, I also feel like the process. So we're having an open meeting now to get feedback, but you all have already moved forward with purchasing the new building. So personally, as a citizen, I would have liked to have had a discussion about the options beforehand, before you all are kind of pushing the momentum into renovating the hardware building, if that makes sense. And then I also wonder, I don't know if this is doable, but it does seem like City Hall is in dire straits. What's the size of just a thought that came to me, but what's the size of the downtown public library? Is there a way that maybe those facilities, you could shut down the public library, renovate it as City Hall, and then put the library back in the old City Hall, as a thought? Or just the other creative ways that we can save all the buildings. I think we do tear down far too many buildings in this city. I think part of that is international building code, certain standards that we've chosen to adopt. I think that was less prevalent maybe with the Amarillo codes. And I think that, we are sort of we came out of nothing in the plains, on the plains, and the thing that makes that beautiful is the fact that you have old buildings around. That's what makes it have any unique features at all. You go to Denver, you go to small Colorado cities, the things that make them unique is the fact that they have been able to save their historic buildings and reintegrate them into the fabric of their cities. And that's what makes the city beautiful and interesting. So I would implore you all to find a way to do that if you can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. City Manager, could we possibly have Jerry just come back? And I heard 3 questions in that. Why we didn't go with Central Library as a location. Something that we didn't talk about, and that is the challenge of renovating a building that we're trying to also at the same time occupy and do business out of. And then the third, I heard this question multiple times, was it's a 1930s building, Amarillo Hardware. Can you, and you touched on it in your presentation, but why is it structurally better, or is it, than existing City Hall? Why doesn't it have the same plumbing issues? Does it? So I can remind you those 3 questions, but just start with Central Library.
That would be greatly appreciated, the reminder.
Yeah.
I'll start with your last question. Amarillo Hardware is unique in the fact that...
Can you pull the microphone up just a little bit, Jerry?
I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
Amarillo Hardware is a unique building in the fact that it basically is a shell. There's nothing inside the building to demo, or very little, I should say that. There is no mechanical systems within the structure for us to repurpose or reuse. And the mechanical systems as far as plumbing, the cast iron pipe and everything that we've referenced earlier doesn't exist in that building because they had very few restrooms in that building at the time. So when you look at a remodel like that, basically to steal a contractor's firm that we use, we're starting on a structure that's what we would call dried in. It's already completed as far as the exterior shell. So that allows us to go to work immediately inside of a structure like that. As the architectural and engineering proceeds, that allows us to develop those spaces in the way that we would need it for a large public space with large areas for council meetings, for all the different boards and commissions that the city has. If we remodel a city hall, in order to accomplish some of the things that we had listed, we still have to shut down City Hall. If I take the plumbing and the cast iron out of City Hall, we're going to have a period of time that we have to be shut down because I wouldn't have restroom facilities available. If I do it in phases, I will impact certain areas at certain times, which means certain services will be shut down because they can't operate because we either don't have power, don't have plumbing, don't have heating, don't have cooling. So those are all components of a remodel of an existing structure that is currently occupied. So when we look at it, of course we look at utility billing or vital statistics or any of the departments that currently function in City Hall, we would be looking at shutdown periods for them during a remodel phase. Moving to a shell allows us to move at a more expedited pace. And your next question was?
Central Library, the size of it, and why council didn't go with that as an option.
Central Library does not have enough square footage to accommodate what the current City Hall is, nor does it have enough space for us to look at additional growth. As the city continues to grow, the departments will grow to provide the same level of service that they currently provide. So, as the population increases, we need to increase our services to meet that. That means more staff. And when we get to those points, the Central Library is not large enough to accommodate that. With the square footage that we're looking at, Amarillo Hardware is 142, as I said, and when we look at City Hall, it's 82,000 square feet. That gives us the growth potential. I believe Central Library, as it sits right now, I think is right at 70,000 square feet.
I think also when it comes to library, the Central Library, having built a couple of other multi-story libraries, the construction standards for a library are different. And I don't know that our current City Hall wouldn't structurally accommodate them, but the static loads in a library on the subsequent floors, if they have stacks on them, are significantly higher than any other office space. So this building having been built as an office, like I said, I don't know that it wouldn't handle the static loads, but that's a big consideration. Also, we would still have all of the costs with our existing City Hall if we were to use it as a full-time facility. We wouldn't have the option to move to anything smaller or to a smaller scope with regard to the library services because we've already cut library services down to the very minimum that we can do and still maintain our state accreditation, which allows us to be able to do interlibrary exchanges and other things, be able to work with the state library system, et cetera. And I know that wasn't something that Mr. Ingles was proposing. It is something, though, that we would have to consider as we decide where to relocate library services if we were to do that. However, Jerry's articulated a number of reasons why that would not be a practical location to put City Hall services.
And then it was posed as to why this wasn't on the ballot in May. And I'll just speak my opinion, council may want to chime in, but in order to put something on the ballot, it's about a 3-month window. I don't know what that date was, mid-February, in order to put something on the May ballot. At that time, we were still really in the heat of COVID. We were vaccinating. A lot of our effort and our time was going toward vaccine rollout and vaccine clinic. And we're thrilled with the timeline. I mean, I love that you are sitting out there not wearing masks and that our city is fully open. But we couldn't see that that was the case at the time in February when that deadline hit. So just really to Ms. London's point of just tone deafness, we were trying very hard to not be tone deaf to putting something on the ballot. It was on the ballot, the Civic Center, in November because it had already been scheduled the previous May, which had happened the previous February before the pandemic. So, I mean, you can take what you want to with that answer, but I just genuinely say to you, it was a very hard thing to have visibility on how the vaccine rollout would go, on whether or not the timing would be right. And now, sitting here in June, you know, with the mask mandates lifted and all of that, it is easy to look backwards and go, well, why didn't that happen? Well, it didn't happen because in February, our visibility of what that was going to look like was very, very different.
That just a little bit. That's almost really not even a fair statement. And it was February the 11th was the last day, I believe, if I remember correctly. The preparation for even getting to the February 11th would have put us in November or December doing some very hard work at that point in time. And I believe November, December, we were more than covered up. We weren't even talking about vaccination at that point in time. We were just talking about trying to do something to keep the hospitals from, they were already upside down at that point in time. So there was no way that we could even conscionably be considering anything concerning City Hall.
But the needs were still there.
Yeah,
it just wasn't our top priority because the pandemic was the top priority. Anything to add to that?
I don't have anything to add. I think what you said, COVID, was the reason, I think. Our plate was full.
Our plate was full. Yeah, it was more than full. But we're so grateful to be where we are now, not talking about that. Now going back to doing the business of working on the projects and priorities that were here before the pandemic. Councilmember Powell or Mayor Pro Tem Powell, anything to add to that?
No, but I do want to say that I appreciate the citizens coming out to our city town hall so that we can listen to them. I really had expected to hear a lot more community solutions, but I will certainly take the feedback that has been given. What's on my mind at the moment is I'm thinking about the situation in Florida and looking at that condo. I certainly do not want to have a conversation with employees' families as to what's happening in that situation. And I say that because it's going to be a tough decision for us to make, but I want to do the right thing, and I want to do it right. And sometimes that's a struggle, just trying to make a decision. I don't want to do something. And so this is our opportunity to, we've done a lot of studying on this, and this is just not like we did it yesterday. And so we have to determine what is the right thing for us to do, you know, for our entire city. And that's always my vision, my focus. And so I want to do it right. I want to do it with integrity, and I don't want to cut corners, to sort of speak.
Councilmember Stanley, do you have any final comments or anything to add?
Well, I feel like we've been fairly productive. I think we're all echoing the same thing, that we are interested in spending the money the wisest way possible, and how is the best way to spend this money. Not do we have to spend any money? I'm not sitting up here voting no, saying I don't want to spend any money. What I am trying to do is figure out how is the best way to spend this money, and what are our other options that can help us balance our other needs that we have all across the city. I didn't ask Jerry, what other buildings do we have that may have elevators that are outdated, or other chillers or boilers. We are looking at City Hall, but I would guess that it's not the only need that we have on our agenda. And then knowing about Parks and Rec and a few other things, I want to come tomorrow prepared to our meeting to help offer, all options and some validity to them. A lot of people are talking about new construction, and I think maybe it is one of those things where the previous city council didn't take a hard look at that, because at the time it was better to renovate and reclaim an existing building. We may have a different scenario to look at. And so when we're going to discuss, potentially hiring an architect, are we at a place where we're ready to hire an architect? Or are we really being productive in this conversation of looking at all of our options and helping each other understand how is the best way for us to assist in directing the expenditures of the citizens' money? And so I thank you guys for your comments, and I'll come prepared tomorrow, and I hope that we continue to push forward to assist so that Jerry Danforth will have everything that he needs to do his job well, and so will the rest of our city departments.
Thank you. Place 2, any final comments? Mayor, okay, sorry, thank you. Place 3, Dr. Sauer.
The only thing that I would say is I think we have a lot of really tough decisions ahead of us, and it just takes I appreciate citizens coming out, expressing their views and their points of view, and I think it's real important that we're listening to them and trying to put the best thing forward, because this is a difficult situation right now. We have to do something about City Hall. We can't push it off any further, and so I appreciate the citizens letting us know what they're thinking and some of their views, and so as we move forward, it'll be interesting to see what actually transpires.
Place 4, Councilmember Smith.
I don't have anything else.
Okay, thank you. Again, we do appreciate your time. We appreciate your ideas, and I think we're adjourned.